The waves crashed softly against the shore, a rhythmic melody that had always soothed Liam's restless heart. Tonight, however, it did little to calm him. The firehouse had been unusually quiet today, leaving too much time for his thoughts to wander, to memories he tried to bury. He sighed, adjusting the hood of his jacket as he strolled down the nearly deserted boardwalk. The scent of salt and burning wood from a distant bonfire clung to the crisp night air. That was when he saw him, sitting alone on a weathered bench under the dim glow of a street lamp. The man looked lost in thought, his fingers absently tracing the rim of a disposable coffee cup. Liam didn't recognize him, but something about him felt familiar, as if they had crossed paths before, in another lifetime. Liam hesitated, then approached. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying over the gentle hum of the waves. The man looked up, startled for a brief second before his expression softened. "Hey," he replied, his voice smooth yet carrying an undertone of exhaustion. Liam noticed the faint scar along the man's temple, the slight stiffness in his posture, like someone who had seen too much. Endured too much. "You new in town?" Liam asked, shoving his hands into his pockets. The man nodded. "Just moved back, actually." He studied Liam for a moment before offering a small, tired smile. "Ethan." Liam returned the smile, though something in his chest tightened. He had heard that name before. But where? And why did it make his heart race? Liam shifted on his feet, the name echoing in his mind like a half-forgotten song. Ethan. It stirred something deep in his chest, something he couldn't quite grasp. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Ethan said, raising an eyebrow. Liam forced a chuckle. "Nah, I swear I've heard your name before." Ethan smirked slightly, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Maybe in another life." There was something in his tone, lighthearted, but guarded. Liam knew that sound well. It was the same way he spoke when people asked about things he wasn't ready to share. "Firefighter, right?" Ethan asked, nodding at Liam's jacket, where a small embroidered emblem of the local fire department peeked out. Liam nodded. "Yeah, been with the department for a few years now." He studied Ethan. "What about you?" Ethan hesitated, then exhaled. "Army medic. Well, just got out." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like the words carried more weight than he let on. Liam's stomach tightened. That explained the scar, the stiffness. He had known a few vets, some found their way back easily. Others, not so much. "You from here?" Liam asked, shifting the conversation before it dipped into darker waters. Ethan glanced out toward the ocean. "Not really. My parents moved here a few years back. I haven't been home much since." Liam hummed in understanding. "Yeah, I get that." A comfortable silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant laughter of late-night beachgoers and the rhythmic crashing of the waves. Liam didn't know why he lingered. Maybe it was the quiet pull of familiarity, or the way Ethan seemed both at ease and on edge at the same time. After a moment, Ethan let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "You don't have to keep me company. You know, I promise I'm not a brooding mystery man in need of saving." Liam smirked. "Oh, good. That was gonna be my next question." Ethan huffed out a laugh and took another sip of his coffee. "I just needed some air, I guess." Liam knew that feeling, too. The kind of quiet that wasn't really quiet at all. Just a space big enough for ghosts to creep in. "Yeah," he said, kicking at a loose shell on the boardwalk. "Me too." Ethan studied him for a moment, like he was weighing something. Then, with a small nod, he scooted over on the bench. Liam hesitated for only a second before sitting down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while, but somehow, it didn't feel like silence at all. Ethan took another sip of his coffee, cradling the cup between his hands as if savoring the warmth. His posture had eased slightly, though there was still a tension in his shoulders, an invisible weight pressing down. Liam had seen it before. "You ever just sit and listen?" Ethan finally asked, breaking the quiet. Liam glanced at him. "To what?" Ethan gestured toward the ocean. "The waves, the wind, the little sounds people ignore." Liam smirked. "You a poet or something?" Ethan huffed out a chuckle. "Nah, just spent a lot of time in places where silence meant danger." Hard to shake the habit. That quiet confession settled between them. Liam understood more than he let on. He had spent enough nights staring at ceilings, trying to turn off his brain, trying to drown out the echoes of things he couldn't forget. "Guess that makes two of us," Liam said after a moment. Ethan turned his head slightly, studying him. "Firefighting, that ever get easier?" Liam exhaled a short laugh. "You mean running into burning buildings while everyone else is running out?" "Not really." He shrugged. But you stop thinking about it. You just do it. Ethan nodded, like he knew exactly what Liam meant. Maybe he did. The silence returned, but this time, it was comfortable. It felt less like avoidance and more like understanding. After a few minutes, Ethan stretched out his legs, letting his boots scuff against the wooden planks of the boardwalk. I don't usually talk to strangers this much, he admitted, shaking his head with a small, amused smile. Liam grinned. Then I guess we're not strangers anymore. Ethan tilted his head, considering that, maybe not. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. You ever feel like you don't quite belong anywhere? Liam blinked at the question, caught off guard, but then, after a moment, he nodded. Yeah, more than I'd like to admit. Ethan tapped his fingers against the side of his cup. I thought getting out of the army would make things easier. Like I'd finally be free. His jaw tensed. But I don't know who I am outside of it. Feels like I left a piece of myself behind. And I don't know how to get it back. Liam swallowed, something tight forming in his chest. He had seen this before. Friends who got out of the service only to feel more lost than ever. The world kept moving, but they felt stuck in a different time. A different version of themselves. You're not alone in that, Liam said, his voice softer than he expected. Takes time to figure out where you fit again. Ethan's lips pressed together, as if he wanted to believe him but wasn't sure he could. Liam hesitated, then added, I had a buddy, Mike. He was a Marine. When he got out, he moved back home, but nothing felt the same. He kept saying he didn't know how to be a civilian. Ethan looked at him. What happened to him? Liam smiled faintly. He found something that made sense to him. Started working at a rescue center for military dogs. Gave him a purpose again. Ethan huffed out a laugh. So what? You're saying I should adopt a dog? Liam grinned. Wouldn't hurt. Chicks dig it. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly looking to impress any chicks. Liam's heart thudded once. Hard. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was reading too much into it. Or maybe it was something. Liam wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long while, he found himself wanting to know more. He leaned back against the bench, stretching his arms along the backrest. So, no dog, no chicks. What's the plan, then? Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. No idea. Liam nodded. Well, maybe you don't have to figure it all out tonight. Ethan looked at him, the tension in his face softening just a fraction. Maybe not. The waves crashed again, steady and unchanging. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he wasn't drowning. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. But something had shifted. Liam found himself glancing at his phone more often, half expecting a message from Ethan. Not that he had a reason to expect one. They weren't exactly friends. Not yet, at least. Still, that night on the boardwalk lingered in his mind. The way Ethan had spoken. The quiet honesty in his words. The way his eyes had held something unspoken. Something Liam wanted to understand. It wasn't until 3 days later, after his shift at the fire station, that Liam spotted Ethan again. He was sitting at the small cafe near the pier. The same one Liam often stopped at for coffee. Ethan was hunched over a notebook, pen tapping idly against the page, his brow furrowed in deep thought. Liam hesitated. He could walk away, pretend he hadn't seen him. But before he could talk himself out of it, his feet were already moving. Didn't take you for the journaling type, Liam said, dropping into the chair across from Ethan without asking. Ethan startled slightly, then huffed a quiet laugh. It's not a journal. Liam raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? Ethan closed the notebook, resting his forearm over it. Just notes. Liam smirked. That vague answer makes me think it actually is a journal. Ethan rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Instead, he pushed the second cup of coffee sitting on the table toward Liam. Figured you'd show up eventually. Liam blinked in surprise. Oh yeah? Ethan shrugged. Small town. We were bound to run into each other again. Liam studied him for a moment before taking the cup. Thanks. He took a sip, savoring the warmth. So, how's the whole figuring out life thing going? Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Still working on it. Liam nodded. Yeah, me too. The days blended into a rhythm. Early morning shifts at the fire station for Liam. Long hours at the clinic for Ethan. And stolen moments in between where their paths crossed. Seemingly by chance. Except it wasn't really chance anymore. Liam found himself walking past the small cafe near the pier more often. Even when he didn't need coffee. Ethan seemed to linger in places he knew Liam would be. Neither of them acknowledged it outright. But it was happening. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Liam found himself back on the boardwalk. the scent of salt thick in the air. He wasn't surprised to see Ethan sitting on one of the benches overlooking the ocean. "This is becoming a habit," Liam said as he approached. Ethan smirked but didn't look away from the waves. "I won't report you if you don't report me." Liam chuckled, dropping onto the bench beside him. "Deal." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ocean stretched out before them, vast and endless, the waves rolling in steady and constant. "Long day?" Liam finally asked. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Yeah, lost a patient today." Liam turned to him, watching as Ethan's fingers curled into fists on his lap. "I'm sorry." Ethan shook his head. It wasn't unexpected. She was older, had been sick for a long time. But still, it never gets easier. Liam understood that feeling all too well. The helplessness of it, the weight of loss, even when you told yourself it was inevitable. "I get it," Liam said quietly. "Firefighting isn't just about saving people. Sometimes we can't." Ethan finally looked at him then, something raw in his gaze. "How do you deal with that?" Liam thought about it for a moment before answering. "You don't, not really. You just carry it. Some days, it's heavier than others, but you keep going." Ethan exhaled a soft, humorless laugh. "That's a terrible answer." Liam smiled. "Yeah, but it's the truth." Silence settled between them again. Heavier this time. The kind of silence that held meaning. That wasn't empty. After a while, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice coming here." Liam glanced at him. "Do you regret it?" Ethan hesitated. "No, but it's different than I thought it would be." Liam nodded, understanding more than Ethan probably realized. Life has a way of doing that. Ethan let out a soft hum of agreement. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Why did you stay?" Liam frowned slightly. "In this town?" Ethan nodded. Liam looked back out at the ocean, considering his words, "Because leaving felt like running. And I was tired of running." Ethan didn't respond right away, but Liam could feel him watching. Finally, Ethan said, "Maybe staying takes more courage than leaving." Liam let out a quiet laugh. "I don't know about that." "I do." Liam turned, meeting Ethan's gaze. There was something different about the way Ethan was looking at him now. Not just curiosity, not just understanding, but something deeper. Something neither of them had said out loud yet. Something they weren't quite ready to name. A cool breeze swept through, carrying the scent of the ocean with it. Ethan shivered slightly, barely noticeable, but Liam caught it. Without thinking, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Ethan's shoulders. Ethan blinked at him, surprised. "You didn't have to. Just take it." Liam interrupted, smirking. "I don't need you getting sick and blaming me for it." Ethan huffed but didn't argue. He pulled the jacket tighter around himself. And for a moment, he just sat there, looking at Liam like he was trying to figure something out. "Thanks," Ethan finally murmured. Liam nodded. "Anytime." They sat there for a while longer, watching the waves, the silence between them feeling less like a void and more like a bridge, something unspoken but understood. And for the first time in a long time, Liam felt like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. Liam leaned back against the bench, watching Ethan out of the corner of his eye. There was something different about tonight, not just the quiet, not just the way Ethan lingered instead of leaving. It was the way the air between them felt charged, like something was waiting to happen. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice soft. "You ever feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what?" Liam tilted his head, considering the question. "Yeah, all the time." Ethan turned to look at him then, something unreadable in his expression. "And what do you do when that feeling doesn't go away?" Liam exhaled slowly. "You figure out what it is you're waiting for, and then you decide if it's worth chasing." Ethan held his gaze for a beat longer, then looked away. "And if you're afraid of the answer?" Liam gave a quiet chuckle. "Then you're already halfway there." Ethan let out a breathy laugh, shaking his head. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Liam admitted, "but nothing worth having ever is." They sat there for a while longer, neither of them speaking, the ocean filling the spaces between words. The moment stretched, thick with something neither of them dared to name. Finally, Ethan stood, hesitating for just a second before pulling Liam's jacket tighter around his shoulders. "I should go." Liam nodded but didn't move. "Yeah." Ethan hesitated again, then, without another word, turned and walked away. Liam watched him go, watched the way his steps slowed just slightly before he disappeared down the boardwalk. Liam exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He had been in enough fires to recognize the feeling spreading through his chest, the slow, creeping burn of something inevitable. It wasn't until 3 nights later that fate, or maybe something else, pushed them together again. The call came in just after sunset. A house fire. A bad one. Flames already licking at the roof by the time Liam and his team arrived. The family had made it out. But the father was still inside, trapped somewhere on the second floor. Liam didn't hesitate. He went in. The heat was suffocating, the smoke thick, but he moved on instinct. He found the man unconscious near the hallway, barely breathing. He hauled him over his shoulder and pushed through the burning house. Each step a battle against the fire trying to pull him down. By the time he got outside, his lungs burned, his muscles screaming. The paramedics rushed forward, and that's when he saw him, Ethan, moving with sharp precision, directing his team, eyes scanning Liam before locking onto the man he had just pulled out. Liam barely had time to catch his breath before Ethan was in front of him. Eyes narrowed. "Are you okay?" Liam pulled off his helmet, nodding. "Yeah, I'm." Before he could finish, Ethan grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward the ambulance. "Sit." Liam huffed. "Ethan, I'm fine." Ethan shot him a glare that could have stopped a wildfire in its tracks. "I don't care. Sit." Liam sat. Ethan worked quickly, checking Liam's pulse, shining a light in his eyes, running his hands over his arms to check for burns. His touch was clinical, professional, but beneath it, there was something else. "Your oxygen levels are low," Ethan muttered. "You need to take it easy." Liam smirked. "You say that like I know how." Ethan didn't smile. "You scared me." Liam blinked, caught off guard by the raw honesty in Ethan's voice. Ethan swallowed hard, his hand still resting against Liam's wrist, his fingers just barely brushing over his pulse. "I know this is your job. I know you do this all the time. But watching you run into that fire," he shook his head, exhaling sharply. "It's different when it's you." Liam's heart pounded harder than it had inside that burning house. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them blurred, fire trucks, sirens, people moving in controlled chaos, but all Liam could see was Ethan. And then, before he could stop himself, Liam reached up, his fingers curling lightly around Ethan's wrist. "I'm here," he said quietly. Ethan looked at him, his jaw tight, something flickering behind his eyes. And then he let out a breath, the tension in his shoulders loosening just slightly. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "You are." The fire had been put out, but Liam could feel another one burning between them, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. The fire had long been extinguished, but its heat lingered in the air, or maybe that was just Ethan. Still standing too close, his fingers still brushing against Liam's wrist. It was an innocent touch. Barely anything at all, but Liam felt it like a live wire sparking beneath his skin. Ethan must have realized it too because he suddenly pulled away, clearing his throat and taking a step back. "You should get checked out at the hospital," he said, his voice back to that professional, carefully measured tone. Liam smirked, flexing his fingers. "I'm fine." Ethan crossed his arms. "Liam, I'm fine." Liam repeated, softer this time. His eyes held Ethan's, a silent plea for something he couldn't quite name. For a second, Ethan looked like he might argue. Then, with a sigh, he glanced around at the controlled chaos surrounding them, the flashing lights, the voices crackling over radios. "Fine," Ethan relented, "but you need to rest. No heroics for at least 24 hours. Liam grinned. "Define heroics." Ethan gave him a flat look. "Don't make me sedate you." Liam chuckled, shaking his head, but as Ethan turned away to check on the other patients, the grin slowly faded from his lips. Something had shifted tonight, and there was no ignoring it anymore. Ethan's place was a small rental near the beach, tucked between a coffee shop and an old bookstore. Warm light glowed behind the curtains, a stark contrast to the cold night air. Liam hesitated at the doorstep, running a hand through his damp hair. This was stupid. He should go home, get some sleep, let whatever this was settle before it turned into something neither of them could take back. Before he could talk himself out of it, the door swung open. Ethan stood there in sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, his hair slightly messy like he'd run his fingers through it too many times. His expression flickered between surprise and something softer. "Hey," Ethan said, his voice quieter than usual. Liam exhaled. "Hey." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then Ethan stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." Liam did. Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "Did something happen?" Liam shook his head. "No, he hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't want to be alone." Ethan's gaze softened, and for once, he didn't try to fill the silence with logic or deflection. He just nodded, as if he understood more than Liam was saying. Without another word, Ethan walked to the kitchen, grabbing 2 mugs from the cabinet. Tea or coffee? Liam huffed a small laugh. You're not gonna offer me whiskey? Ethan shot him a look. You just ran into a burning building. You're getting tea. Liam didn't argue. As Ethan moved around the kitchen, Liam sat on the couch, letting his body finally relax. He watched Ethan's hands, steady, capable, the same hands that had checked him for injuries earlier that night. You scared me, you know. Liam blinked. Ethan hadn't turned around, but his voice was quiet, raw in a way Liam had never heard before. You've seen me run into fires before, Liam said carefully. Ethan turned then, setting the mugs on the coffee table. That doesn't mean I get used to it. Liam swallowed. I'm careful. That's not the point. Ethan sat down beside him, close but not quite touching. One day, you won't come back out. Liam exhaled, rubbing his hands together. You can't think like that. Ethan let out a humorless laugh. I don't have a choice. Something in his voice made Liam's chest tighten. This is why, Ethan started, then stopped, shaking his head. Why what? Liam asked. Ethan hesitated, then he met Liam's gaze. Something breaking open between them. Why I keep trying to keep my distance. Liam's pulse jumped. Ethan looked down at his hands, exhaling slowly. Because if I don't, this, whatever this is, gets harder. Liam was quiet for a long moment. Then, without thinking, he reached out, covering Ethan's hand with his own. Ethan stiffened slightly but didn't pull away. Liam's voice was low when he spoke. Maybe it's supposed to be hard. Ethan looked up, something raw and aching in his eyes. The space between them was small. Too small. Liam's fingers tightened over Ethan's. And this time, Ethan didn't let go.